You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're delighted to be joined once again by one of our directors, Shev Pring. This is the fourth time he's been on the podcast and I'm looking forward to what I know it's going to be an interesting and thought-provoking conversation. This time he's here to talk to me about experiential learning. We're going to discuss what it is, how it can be facilitated and most importantly, why it works. Thanks for joining me again, Shev.
Absolute pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Me too. Let's start straight in there with a layman's explanation of what experiential learning is.
Okay, so I've got my version, but also before that I've got the direct quote from the Association for Experiential Education.
Oh, I didn't even know there was an association for that.
There you go.
Okay.
So they say it's a philosophy that informs many methodologies in which educators purposefully engage with learners in direct experience and focused reflection in order to increase knowledge, develop skills, clarify values, and develop people's capacity to contribute to their communities.
That's quite a wordy explanation.
Well, so this is why I also put mine in, because you said layman's terms, and I was like, I'm not sure that applies. So what I would say it is experiential learning means we're meeting learners where they are. We're coming alongside them as a facilitator, and we're being part of a support network that goes on that learning journey with them. And we're using the experience and the reflections from that experience to help them to develop their own learning journey.
Yeah, because I know some people have used this phrase learning by doing, but it's a bit more complex than that, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, learning by doing is part of it.
Yeah.
But there's the reflective practice element of it as well is key, and you can do that both way round. Yeah. So you can do the learning by doing, which leads to the reflective practice, or you can reflect almost like thinking scientifically. You can have an idea and then test that experientially. Yeah. So both are valid, and there are pros and cons to that, but they both serve the same purpose in terms of being part of that experiential learning. Okay. When we get onto Kolb's learning cycle, it is a kind of continuous loop. Yeah. So that kind of one leads to the other, and your reflections will then lead back to further experiences, and it keeps going round in a circle. Okay.
Well, that seems like a nice segue to go straight into the theories behind it. So David Kolb and John Dewey are two of the key players, I think. So can you tell me about their work and their thoughts on experiential learning?
Yeah, so Kolb talks about experiential learning and Dewey talks about experiential education.
Okay, and there's a difference?
Depends who you talk to.
Okay.
Most people just see it all as part of the same thing.
Because I use education and learning interchangeably quite a lot.
Yeah.
But obviously not everyone would agree with that.
No, not everyone. And so if we start with Dewey, the reason that he makes the distinction is because he was an educator. And he was absolutely horrified by the idea that experiential learning meant that there was no place for instruction at all. Okay. He thought that just was too far the other way and didn't work at all, which is why I think he talks about experiential education, because the role of the facilitator or the teacher is quite important in the process still. So I think that's where that distinction is often made. Whereas,
so the education is kind of insinuates a teacher being involved or a facilitator?
Yeah, so he would, I've got a direct quote from Dewey. He says, education is a regulation of the process of coming to share in the social consciousness, and that the adjustment of individual activity on the basis of this social consciousness is the only sure method of social reconstruction. So he's talking about how we need to put education at the heart of social change, because it's intrinsic to that process, but it requires that kind of guide, that facilitator, that teacher, whatever you're going to call them, to be a part of that process. It's not just a free-for-all, and I think his concern in that kind of social reconstruction element is around every generation would just tear up the rule book and we'd never get anywhere. There needs to be a level of building on what's gone before, and that requires a level of input as well as just kind of it's your own experience. It needs both. So he was quite clear that needed both. Interestingly, and again I think we're going to come on to this later, but that is also very similar philosophically to the basis of the dialectic that Hegel talks about. And that is about the freedom of the individual versus the freedom of society, and where that compromise sits. It's a very similar kind of concept. He's come at it slightly differently, but they're trying to solve the same problem, which is how do we exist in society and exist as an individual and make both of those things work, because they are often in conflict. And education is at the heart of that. Do we educate because it's good for society? There is a social need for people to be educated, or do we educate in order to free the individual and allow them to pursue their own kind of thoughts and their own path to the fullest of their ability? And again, we're always in conflict and tension between those two, and trying to find a balance seems to be at the heart of a lot of education theory, and I find that really interesting. But I think
the difference between individualism and community.
And they both hold merit, clearly. They're both very important, but they do often
conflict.
That's it. Which is, I think, is that. So this is where Dewey talks about experiential education, whereas Kolb is talking much more about the direct experience of learners. So he talks about most teachers will have come across Kolb's cycle of learning, which is around concrete experience, moving to reflective observation, which then moves to abstract conceptualization, which then moves to active experimentation, and then that then leads back to experience, and then kind of
round and round.
Which is what I was talking about thinking scientifically. It's that idea of my prior experience teaches me so much, and therefore I build a hypothesis which I then actively kind of look at and play with and experience, and that then leads to a link to that kind of abstract conceptualization, which is this is the theory behind the experience I've had, and then does that fit the concrete experience? Kind of takes you back into that cycle again, and so. But that's very individual. So he's talking about the learner needing to be involved in the process, about the learner being able to reflect on the experience, about the learner possessing and using the analytical skills to conceptualize the experience, and the learner possessing the decision-making and problem-solving skills to use the new ideas. So it's very much about an individual skill set. Hence being experiential learning, not experiential education. But you can see how they both form part of one kind of cohesive idea. They're just kind of approaching it slightly differently. Which is why some people lump it all in together and just go, it's all one thing. Doesn't need to be separate. And some people see that as being quite distinct.
When were Dewey and Kolb writing about this stuff? How new is this?
19th, 20th century. So Dewey was end of the 19th century. And Kolb was 20th century.
So it's been around for a while.
Good 100 years plus. It's not new. I was listening to a podcast about humanocracy.
I've not heard
this morning. No, so it's about removing bureaucracy in organisations and replacing it with people who can make autonomous decisions, and that being much better in terms of how organisations kind of stay innovative and deal with change. But part of that was about, he was talking about human motivation, and he said that if you go back through all of the kind of literature, every generation rediscovers what's at the heart of human motivation. They all write about exactly the same things, but they all then completely fail to apply it, and the next generation rediscovers it.
Which is what Dewey's trying to prevent.
Yeah, but I feel like that is also what's happened with experiential learning. It gets kind of reinvented
with a new name.
Yes. So it's been around for a long time. It's bits of it are quite well understood, but it's never quite embedded fully. It always kind of it keeps iterating through the generations. So
do you think it's like within like the educational sphere? Do you think it's like goes in and out of fashion?
Yeah, I mean everything does. There's always cycles, aren't there? That happens.
Although some things
with fashion and politics and education, and they all have these kind of these big kind of loops that close at some point and come back to when they start.
Come back round. Although I'm not that I'm an educator myself, I'd kind of assume that within education there'd be some things that would remain like constants.
Well, the idea of experiential learning is a constant in terms of the theory. How you apply it depends on how you approach education, and that changes over time. So it gets used differently as a tool.
Depending on That was another great segue. Thanks, Shev. You're on it today, because I now want to move into practical terms, which is what you literally just said. So, give me some examples of what experiential learning might look like in practice.
Okay, so the first example is the idea of being entirely experiential with no kind of facilitation.
In the home ed world, we'd call this unschooling.
Absolutely. The best example that I can think of that working, that everyone will understand as being successful, is the idea of a baby learning to walk and talk. There is no direct instruction. No one sits a baby down and goes, this is how you walk. And yet all babies learn to walk. That really is like the purest example of experiential learning with no facilitation. They are responding to the feedback in their environment, the modelling that's going on around them, and they are just doing that themselves through experience, through trial and error.
That's a great example.
So that's a really clear example of the kind of no facilitation. In terms of kind of education and how we would use experiential learning in a kind of typical mainstream setting, an example might be more around you have a project maybe on ecosystems or the natural world, and you then might go out with your class and do pond dipping. So you're trying to relate the content of your curriculum and your lesson to a real world situation in order to kind of enhance and deepen the learning. That would be a kind of an example of how that might typically be used in a school setting. And again, that happens a lot, that modelling through the, here's the theory, here's the experience. That's quite a well understood pathway for learning that teachers use a lot. I think there are some issues with it, but it is a kind of tried and tested use of experiential learning.
And there's some subjects that are going to lend themselves to that more than others, right? Because I was just thinking, like, I don't know, like geography, sciences, I can see how it's really easy.
Yeah, it depends what you think of the experience. So yes, if you're talking about outdoor learning, they would lend themselves to that. If you're, but anything involving the use of technology, is fairly inherently experiential. When we talk about technology being intuitive to use, that is about it being keyed into human experience and behaviour. So that happens through a feedback loop of experience. So any interaction at any level is to some degree experiential. You can make those real world links more directly with some subjects than others. Yes, it's easier to do it with geography than it is with maths.
English language.
So that it can be done. You can do it with anything. So it is easier or harder, and sometimes it's about the institution of a school that puts a barrier in place, and sometimes it's about the topic. So there are different kind of reasons why it is used or not used.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. What difference does experiential learning or education make in the long term for the learner in how they've acquired the knowledge? Like, what impact does it have?
Yeah, so I think at the heart of this question is the idea of is the experience curated or is it learner-led?
Okay.
And I think that's really where the difference comes. So when we look at the previous examples, learning to walk is entirely learner-led. It's intrinsically motivated, it's led by the learner, it's entirely their experience and their motivation. If you look at the example of pond dipping in a class, that's where you have a very set aim and a curated experience by a facilitator. So it's still experiential learning, but it's different in that the motivations aren't intrinsic. It's kind of laid on for you. So I think for me, the impact that has is that firstly, we learn best when we're engaged and we're enjoying what we're doing. When this is entirely learner-led, that is guaranteed because it's intrinsically motivated. Where that is tutor or teacher-led, it's not guaranteed. Can still be there, can still be effective, but isn't guaranteed in the same way. So anytime you can make it learner-led and follow the learner on that experience, you will guarantee that they are going to enjoy the learning process and they're intrinsically motivated to do it, and that will make a difference. The second thing is that where we draw on past experience to shape our own learning, we're already engaged in the metacognitive toolkit. So that is the learning tools that we employ in order to learn. And because we're using these as the starting point of that inquiry, what happens is we have already made the link between the metacognitive toolkit and how we're applying that experientially. When you turn that on in your head and you're going, here's the content of the curriculum we're putting in, and here's a curated experience, what you then have to do is go, how does this curated experience link back to the knowledge I want you to learn? You have to explicitly help them make that link. Whereas when they are coming at it themselves, they've already done that. So very often what you'll end up with is a situation where a curated experience, you then have to kind of tease out the right answer and go, this is what we're trying to get you to learn, this is where you link it back to the theory, and the likelihood of that being misinterpreted is quite high. Where the learner's done that intrinsically, they will very often go, I can see that link and I can see how that applies over here, and what about this, and I remember something my dad said a week ago, and they make those links because they're coming from a place of the metacognitive toolkit, not a place of the experience first. So I think that can have quite a profound effect on how the learning works. The third point I'd say is that where the experiences are curated, you're looking at a fixed point. So you already have in mind before the learner has the experience what it is they need to be getting out of that experience. It is quite a closed loop. And this can mean learners get confused about what links need to be made, or can be quite limited in the learning because it's quite a narrow pathway. And so you quite often will find, and I'm sure you've had this experience, I can remember it from school, getting a response when you're asked a question and you answer it, you get a response something like, that's close, but it's not quite what I was looking for. Can someone else give me an answer? That's where a facilitator or a teacher is trying to tease out a really specific link because of the curated nature of the experience. And you can see how that kind of narrows the learning experience, and that can be very limiting. Again, none of these have to be. They're all things that can be overcome, and a good facilitator, a good teacher will be able to make that quite broad and make those links quite effective, and you know that there are, you know, there is good practice that can happen and come out of it. It's not you know, it's not invalid in any way, but you can see the risks are there in a way that they're not when it's intrinsic and learner led. So that, I think, for me is a big distinction, is that starting point is quite key.
Where the motivation's coming from. But presumably, even when it is curated, there's still value in those experiences.
Absolutely.
Just that it might not be quite as impactful as
and you could, you know, the trouble doesn't necessarily come from what the learners take from the experience. The trouble comes from assessing that to have been successful or a failure based on what you're trying to pull out of it. The learner will gain something from that experience, 100%. That they will have gone on a learning journey. It just may not have been the learning journey you wanted them to go on. Now, that's a problem for you if you're curating that experience and trying to assess against it. The learner is fine. They're getting an experience. They're getting something out of it. That's, you know, you just don't necessarily know what they're getting out of it.
No.
So it is still valid. You know, it's still learning. It's still important. It's just not necessarily the best way around. If you're talking about really trying to kind of make that learning experience as rich and as important to the learner as you can, it works much better if that's intrinsic and learner-led.
So it sounds like it goes hand in hand with like learner-led education, doesn't it?
I think absolutely. The less you can curate it and the more you can let a learner go on that journey of discovery, the more likely you are to draw out a complex, rich and nuanced set of learning from that. You don't know what that's going to be.
No.
But if you go on that journey with them, then you can help them make sense of that. And so it does fairly profoundly change your view of what a teacher is. If you start to kind of look at experiential learning as being at the heart of the process, you do have to kind of take a step back and go, actually, what's my role now? Is the value of the teaching in this? Because it's not in the same place as it might be if you're using a different model of instruction.
Like more I don't know, traditional word, like that kind of rote learning or things like that, like completely different.
Absolutely.
Well, so I guess that does lead on quite nicely again. It's like you'd planned this. So for people that are working in education, so if you've got teachers listening to this, how can we deliver experiential learning as part of our teaching and learning within the system that we're already in? Because obviously you were saying about it might make you kind of reconsider your role, and there might be people out there that think, this is great, but how do I fit that into like the way that my school does it or whatever?
So I think there are three things that I've thought about that I think are, you know, by no means the only three things, but they're three simple things to kind of get you started on that journey of like, how do I apply this in my setting? And I think they are universal enough to be applied across any setting. That's what I'm aiming at anyway.
Because I was just thinking, like, it's really easy for us to talk like hypothetically about this perfect educational setting, but obviously people are bound by national curriculum or the head teachers or whatever.
There's a you know, all educational settings have some kind of barriers. You know, that's and yes.
Some kind of framework that they've got to operate within.
Exactly. So I'd say the first thing for me is be genuinely curious about the questions and answers in your learning environment. So really try hard not to begin with a set answer in mind, and where you can, or where learners give you an answer that isn't what you kind of thought it might be, if you can follow that up with questions around how the learner arrived at that conclusion, that will align you with going on that learning journey with them, because they will take you through their kind of process of how they arrived at the answer, even if the answer is mathematical and totally wrong. what matters.
Yeah, maths as well. I was just thinking.
Yeah. The point is if I say to you, what is 2 + 2, and you tell me 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you can say.
But that doesn't help.
Yeah.
So if I can then go, that's really interesting. How did you get to that answer? And you can talk me through, and we can walk that road together of how you arrived at that answer. I'm going to be much more effective at helping you understand where the mistake in that is.
Yeah.
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 And I'm going to have a much better understanding of that learning, so it becomes much more valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, you just reminded me. I did my Hill and Moorland leader assessment recently, and you had to navigate to a point on the map and then declare to the assessor when you thought you'd made it to the point. And one of the assessors was great because he said, "Oh, so how what is it on the map and in the landscape around us that makes you think that we're here?" And it was really good, like just the questions he asked, like, so this feature here on the map, where's that in real life? And like just walked you through step by step by step, so you could like get to the point of whether you've done it right or not. But he really kind of and exactly that kind of, how did you get to this exact point? Like
yeah.
Really useful.
And the point really is that it doesn't matter if you're wrong. That's not the point of that whole process. The idea is not to ask a question to get the right answer. The point is to ask the question in order to engage the learner in that thought process and that discussion and that discovery. And if that's your mindset with your questioning, you will start to, whatever setting you're in, even just sat in the classroom, it will become a much more experiential learning environment because you're working on that feedback loop. That is Kolb's model. You're doing it verbally rather than doing in the world, but you're still going through that experiential process with the learners. So that's a really clear and quite an easy one to apply to any setting. So I think that would be my first one. My second one is slightly harder, and I can hear the sighs from teachers already, but try and allow time. And I can hear everyone going, we don't have time, the curriculum's too full. You're right, and I get that, it is a nightmare, I understand that, but where you can allow time for the random lines of inquiry, for the deviations, when a learner is having a learning conversation with you and it's deviated from the course of your lesson and it's following their line of inquiry, that is an absolute guarantee, that they are intrinsically motivated, engaged in the learning. And if we go back to what I was saying earlier, you are then guaranteeing a rich learning space for them. So if your class or your students are starting to do that, that's a fantastic sign that you've captured their interest, that they are now intrinsically motivated to learn. Run with it if you can, because you the more you can stay on that path with them, the more depth of learning they're going to have. There are limits, and obviously there are distraction tactics from learners and bits and pieces. It's got to be kind of on topic for that to work, and I understand that it's got to fit. But as educators, we all have experience of that, where you really capture something and the learners just go, oh, but what about that? And does it apply when you do that? Or what about in this country or in this situation? And that's fantastic. Run with it. Scrap the lesson plan. Just go, this is really, really good experiential learning. It's intrinsic. They're motivated. They're on topic. They want to go on that journey with you. That's a really good sign. And that's where, again, come alongside them. Go on that journey with them is fantastic, and will pay dividends in terms of their understanding of linking back to the concept, because they've started conceptually and intrinsically. They will make those links for you. You won't have to go back and go, this is how that fits in with the theory. They're already doing that.
They're already doing it.
And the third thing I'd say is, be really aware of what you model. So if you're always at the front and you're always the one with the answers, what you're going to be modelling is compliance and passive information transfer. And that's not experiential.
No.
So if you can let learners lead, if you can get them walking up and down to the front, using the board interactively, you are walking around the class or teaching from the back, or, you know, if you want a learner to answer, say, here's the pen, write on the board. Go and sit with the other learners.
Yeah.
Be a learner whilst they're giving their answer. You know, be a part of that. If you can find ways of bringing that in, you're going to give learners a huge amount of ownership over that space.
Yeah.
And that becomes very interactive and very experiential. And that is a real clear modelling of you going on a learning journey with them.
Yeah.
You know, and what that does is it allows them to ask the questions that they want to ask, because they don't have a fear of failure, because you're all on a journey together. You know, it's not about being right or wrong. The other thing it does, which is going to be a huge relief to a lot of teachers, I'm sure, is it just stops you having to be the person with the answers. It takes that pressure off. Go and find out with them. There's nothing wrong in going, do you know what, that's a fantastic question, I've got no idea, let's find out. Yeah, like, go on that journey with them. That's modelling the practice of lifelong and experiential learning.
Well, that's what I was just about to say. It's not really realistic, is it, for a learner to assume that their teacher knows the answer to everything, because no one knows the answer to anything.
No, but most teachers know almost all the answers to do with the lesson they're trying to teach and the curriculum they're trying to put in. And this is conceptually is the difference. You know, if you stop trying to do that and you go on a learning journey with them, you don't need the answers in the same way. And this is where we come back to, if you curate an experience or if you allow an experience to happen. Conceptual, as far as what you're doing as a facilitator, is quite different. It changes the way you approach your role, out on quite a fundamental level. And I think that's, you know, again, we're hitting that same point. You know, what is your role as a teacher here? Is it to facilitate learning and go on that journey with them, or is it to put learning in knowledge, to input, and that makes a difference as to whether or not you need to know the answer. So it can quite profoundly change your practice if you want to kind of take it to that level. But it can also just be quite a simple classroom management process that allows the space to be more experiential for learners. You can use it either way. You can take that as far as you want, and I think that's really where I've tried to go with these ideas is, you know, it can be a simple technique that you add to your teaching toolkit, or it can profoundly change your teaching practice and be absolutely up to you as a practitioner whether you think that's valid and got merit and fits the way that you want to educate.
That's really interesting. Those are some very good tips, thank you.
That's all right.
Because I do think I remember talking to some people working in schools, and they were kind of like, well, that's all very well and good, but how do I actually do that? So it's good to have some actual thoughts on how people can implement it in small ways. And obviously you have worked in education for a very long time, and you're now I don't like this word, I said it earlier, but we're going to use it anyway, proprietor of a school. Can you share some examples of when you've seen experiential learning making a difference or being particularly successful when maybe other methods of learning weren't so effective?
So a good example of how we use the space in our school is around the learners having a safe space. So it's an independent special school, they all have complex needs. It allows them to regulate their own social and emotional state. It puts the learner in charge, and where I've seen that working brilliantly is where learners just go. They know where they're going. They're going to a safe space. They can take themselves out of the learning that's going on, and they can just be somewhere else. And you don't need to worry about that as an educator. You're not going, oh, they're absconding, they're running off. I've got to stop what I'm doing. It's just this natural flow where they're using their experience to help them self-regulate in the space, and that's a really that works really well when you know there's a level of curation in kind of setting that up, but it gives them a tool that allows them to really use that kind of feedback loop in themselves and their own experience to manage their own learning, and that's can be quite profound for learners. It gives them a sense of control that they haven't previously had.
That's what I was trying to say, like what is the hierarchy of needs for education?
Maslow.
Remind me what they are.
So your basic, it basically goes from the bottom is your kind of your physical food, drink, shelter, and then the top of the triangle is around kind of complex thought, and kind of applying of kind of theoretical knowledge.
But one of the other bases is about like your kind of state of mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you need to be in a physically safe space, and then you need to be in a mentally and emotionally safe space, and then you need to be engaged with your surroundings, and then you can start to apply kind of complex theory because everything else is met. So it's this idea that they kind of scaffolded on top of each other. Yeah.
So that's why giving these learners those spaces is so important, and that when they need to go and get that regulation, they can. Yeah,
absolutely. Because they won't learn. This is there's no point in, if you've got a learner that has got, all sorts of trauma, they've had a really tough morning, they've got complex issues going on at home, they come into school with all that baggage, they haven't even had breakfast, and you sit them down and teach them maths, what's the likelihood that they're going to
take it in?
Even if they're even if they're in control enough to sit there and engage with it without going, you know what, this is too much, how much of that are they actually absorbing? They're not in a place where they're receptive and ready to, because they've got so much else going on. And you've probably experienced, I have, I've been stressed getting the kids here, there and everywhere on the school run, and they've got up late and breakfast was late and everyone's rushing and I'm stressed, and then I get into work and someone asks you a question, you're not in a good place to answer that question. You're not mentally prepared to engage in that process. You need to go, actually I need to tea first, I need to just take 5 minutes and kind of, and that's exactly what those kind of learning spaces do. It allows them to do that.
We're so good at doing it with adults and saying, actually, like scheduling meetings, for example. I remember someone saying to me, please don't schedule me a meeting at 1:30 because I'm always too sleepy after work, after lunch. But we don't always afford kids the same thing. And actually, we did a podcast with the learners, and one of the learners from the South Brent site, I remember him saying to me, we're saying, what do you like about the outdoor school that is maybe different from the previous places you've been? And he said, when I get cross, he said I can go off and calm down, and people respect me here to give me the space I need to calm down. And I thought, and he was like, and that's not happened before. And he thought, gosh, it's really sad that, I think he was 13 or 14, that's the first time that someone's been like, oh, I can see that you're stressed, like, do you want company? No? Okay, well then chill out and come back when you need it. But
no,
so
you're
that's
absolutely
really good
right.
to hear it from his, literally from the horse's mouth, being like, that's what I need to do.
And this is where the learner-led element of experiential learning is so powerful. It's that level of, it's the intrinsic motivation on one side, but it's the level of control. It's where you place control is very important. In the same way as where you place knowledge and the learning process is very important. If you hold all of that as a teacher, it gives you a lot of pressure. It gives you a lot of control, and it limits your ability to transfer that because you're having to apply it generally across multiple learners. If you can work towards a model where you're sitting that control with the learner and you're helping them to go on that journey, you can have much deeper learning impact, a much more profound effect across multiple people because you're supporting their journey rather than you having to kind of take them all on the same journey. So it does, again, it profoundly shapes what teaching is if that's the kind of the extent you want to take it. It's that it is very deeply embedded in the idea of what is teaching, what is learning, and where that sits and how that looks. And I've talked before about constructivism and positivism and the philosophy behind it, and this is really it all tracks. Philosophically it's coherent, and all these elements kind of interweave, but at the heart of it is that kind of first principle of what is learning about. Where does learning sit, who is it for, what is the purpose of it. And for me and for our setting, the importance is the lifelong learning, not the discrete data. It's not about putting things into learners' heads. It's about helping them understand on quite a profound level for themselves what learning is about, because they can go out into the world with that knowledge and continue to learn for the rest of their lives. And that's far more valuable to them than coming out of school knowing set things that they may or may not apply. That's very much
they may or may not be interested in.
Absolutely. And so that's really where that's the first principle, as it were, that we operate from, which is why we then go experiential learning is really important, being learner led is really important, being project based is really important, because it's a platform to allow those things to happen. It allows everyone to have their own ownership of learning, because everyone can contribute to a project in the same way. You still have a collective learning experience, but everyone's on their own journey within it. You can't do that if you're teaching from the curriculum in a kind of didactic way. Everyone has to go on the same journey step by step at the same time. So it quite profoundly changes the way you're trying to approach the learning and the facilitation of the learning, and I find that fascinating. I could talk about that for hours, but I think it really does shape what the provision looks like, and I think being given the space in my career to think really deeply about learning and teaching and education and what they mean, and being able to go back to those kind of first principles and the philosophy and have that space to do that thinking has been an absolute luxury and a privilege. And it, I'm immensely thankful that I've had that opportunity, because it has profoundly shaped what we do and changed what we do in relation to a kind of typical setting.
For sure.
But it's not done that on a whim, and I think it's done it through the going through that kind of thought process quite carefully, start to finish, and I think it's been fascinating, and I think we're seeing the difference it makes to learners who work with us.
Some of the stories about how those learners were interacting with education in other settings versus now is quite impressive, quite inspirational.
We had a learner who having flatly refused to write anything for the first 3 years, I don't think he picked up a pen. To walk into one of his sessions just before he left, he's a year 11, he's gone now, but he was in that session talking to his tutor, saying, no, I need to write that letter first, and then I need to send that email, and then I'll go and do what you're asking me to do, and this is why I need to do it in that order. And he was rewriting the plan for the day that the tutor had come up with, reprioritising with a very coherent idea of why. I mean, that how brilliant is that? That's him taking ownership of his learning. That's him using his experience and knowledge to shape the way that he works best. And as a result of that, how much more employable is he than someone who sits and does what they're told? He's thinking autonomously. He's reprioritizing to make efficiencies. He's all of those kind of toolkit, all that metacognition going on behind the scene. He's because he's starting from there, and he's intrinsically motivated. He's using that and applying it in multiple contexts. That's at the heart of what we're trying to do. That's really where the difference is, and that only really starts to pay dividends when you make the learner the one in control.
Yes, and I was just about to say, I think I was reading again, I've written about it every now and then, I think it's in the Forest School and Autism book by Sarah, I've forgotten her surname, I'll have to put it in the show notes. And she talks about the triangle of trust, doesn't she?
Yes.
About that kind of like mutual respect between facilitator, learner and environment, and I think that's also like a really key part of what's different, isn't it? Because when that learner said to the tutor, no, we need to do it in a different order, like that tutor had two choices, right? He could have said, no, this is where we're doing it, and put his foot down.
Absolutely.
But actually he obviously respected the learner enough to go, oh no, actually you're right, let's shift things around. And I think I always feel like that's a massive part of what we do here, that kind of mutual respect on like all three of those triangle kind of angles.
I completely agree, and I think that's why we kind of condense our school rules down to be safe, be kind, because actually
don't need much more else.
What else matters?
If
you can apply those two things, then you've got an environment in which learning can take place. It is that simple, really.
Yeah, and I saw one of our forest school leads doing similar briefing at Totnes, and she said to the kids, be kind to the forest, be kind to yourselves, and be kind to each other. And I was like, oh yeah, that does also encompass everything, because then be kind to yourself is, well, don't put your hand in the fire, because that's not kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
And it was like, actually didn't need any more instruction than that, like everyone can crack on with their day at that point. But I think that's kind of unusual. I think there are a lot of spheres where there's still a attitude with kids where we say, well, I'm the adult, so that's what we do, and it's quite revolutionary to be a bit more like, oh no, actually I'm going to listen to your opinion and maybe change what our plan is or whatever.
Well, again, kind of track this back to kind of first principles. If I'm not prepared to listen to a learner and change what I'm doing as a result of the feedback they're giving me, why on earth would I expect that they would do that for me? It makes no sense to me.
No.
Like it has to work both ways. We have to be modelling what we're trying to teach. Otherwise, why would they listen to me? I can't expect that. And this idea that I'll respect you if you do what I tell you. What we're basically saying there is, I will respect your humanity if you respect my position. Rather than I'll respect you as a person and you respect me as a person, and the position is something that isn't relevant. We will negotiate on that. We'll talk about it. We'll discuss it. And because we respect each other as people, we can have that conversation. We can hold that space and open that conversation, and that's okay. That doesn't have to be an authoritative battle. That can be a conversation. And sometimes those conversations are really tough. Actually, I've watched practitioners spend several hours talking about the social implications of a certain way of behaving and why that may be helpful or unhelpful, and really, but what a powerful bit of learning. Why would we not take the time to do that? And if we dismiss that, a bit like when I was saying, follow those trails, go down those rabbit holes. If we dismiss that and go, that's not on track for what we're trying to do, what a missed opportunity. What a huge bit of learning that just doesn't happen.
Because what if that doesn't come up again?
Yeah, and I think this is where I personally have a big concern around how mainstream schools deal with behaviour, and this is at the heart of it, what we're discussing now, because I think for me the behaviour is the learning.
Yeah.
And if we can stop seeing it as a barrier to the learning and see it as the learning itself, then we can really start to unpick it. I'm not saying the behaviour is appropriate. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be dealt with. But if all we do is put a sanction in place and we don't say this is why, let's take the time to really start to unpick why that is unhelpful. Then we're missing an opportunity. And so we say that in our setting. And I know it's different because we don't have the same constraints being independent, but we say grounding and check-in at the start of the day.
Yeah.
That's about getting everyone to a place where they're happy and they're engaged and they're ready for the day.
Yeah.
If that takes all day, that's fine.
It takes all day,
That is the learning. That's the thing that's important.
Yeah.
It won't take all day forever.
No.
It will take all day for as long as it takes, and then it will be half a day, and then it will be a couple of hours, or we'll get there. We go on that journey. But that learning is happening, and we're coming alongside the learner and going on that journey with them.
Yeah.
We don't need to rush them. At some point, that will pay off, and the leaps forward they'll make in learning as a result, because they'll be in control of their own behaviour and their own regulation. They'll be intrinsically motivated. They will be the focus of their own learning, and they will have a support team in the other people around them, and the facilitator, and the resources that we provide, and the experiences we provide to go on that learning journey. And that will be huge for them. Yeah. Because they're ready.
Yeah, because they're in the right place for it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. I think.
Sorry, I waffled quite a lot.
No, I found it really interesting. I mean, I didn't go into the behaviour stuff too much because sneak peek. I think we're going to do a podcast just about behaviour and behaviour policies at some point, which will be really interesting to unpick and explore.
Yeah.
But it was nice to have a brief kind of thought about it. But I was just thinking, is there anything else about experiential learning or education, depending on which one you're going to go with, that we haven't talked about that you're hoping to cover?
Oh, loads, but not that fit in the time frame, I think. But
any parting thoughts?
No, I think I've covered most of the basics. I just encourage people to go and try it.
Yeah.
Because I do think it makes a profound difference. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
That's all right. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. I love doing these.
Yeah, it's so much fun. It's my favourite part of the job. I've had to change your questions, what you end the podcast with, because the first ones you've already answered. So just quickly, what are you reading or listening to right now?
So I'm listening to this, I'm not sure if it's a podcast or an audiobook, but it's about humanocracy.
On which you said earlier, yeah. What's it called?
Humanocracy.
Oh, it's just called Humanocracy. Okay.
But it's fascinating.
Okay.
It's really
worth a listen.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at experiential learning and you're thinking about the barriers that you're setting or the curriculum put in place, that's what they're talking about, breaking down this idea that bureaucracy is a barrier and allowing people to engage with what they know is going to be like innovative and an improvement. And that's a really interesting argument that they make through that. So
nice.
Yeah, it ties in quite nicely.
Yeah, it ties in quite nicely. And finally, just to finish the podcast, any outdoorsy goals or things you're looking forward to in 2025? Because we are almost at the end of the year.
Yes, we are.
Have you not thought so far to think about next year yet?
I've barely made it to thinking about Christmas, but I need to get back to the mountains next year. I'd like to go skiing if I can.
Nice.
It's been a while, and I think I've got all my children at their various ages are appropriately aged to be able to go skiing now. Nice. And not have someone sat with a baby or like, do you know what I mean? I think it will work. So
nice.
Yeah, that would be
a good goal for 2025.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time again, Shev.
Oh, that's a pleasure.
A massive thank you again to Shev for joining us to talk about experiential learning. I found that a really great conversation, and whether you're a parent, an educator or an interested party, I hope that you found it valuable and worthwhile and engaging as well. That was the first episode of Season 6 of the Outdoors Group podcast. If you're one of our regulars, thanks for coming back. And if you're new, welcome. Why not have a look back through our archives to see some of the other episodes that we've done, to see what you might like listening to. We've covered a whole host of different topics, from childcare, philosophy and education philosophy, to climate change, to looking at what various conservation organisations are doing, to talking to adventurers and explorers and people doing incredible feats. We really have covered quite a lot over the last 5 seasons, and I'm really excited about what I've got in store for the next season. If you are enjoying the podcast and you haven't done so already, we would be so grateful if you would rate the podcast, subscribe to it and share it with your friends so that more people can find us. And if you are interested in joining us as a guest, we would love to hear from you. We are happy to talk about anything to do with outdoors, education or climate change or children or parenting. So we do get in touch if you'd like to be a guest. And I think that's a very long outro for me. So I'll wrap up now, and as always, until next time, thanks for listening.